lessons in 10 minutes or less. I'm Jacob, and in this video I want to address a lot of the questions I've been receiving about becoming an Army aviator. So in this video I'll be outlining that process, and I plan on following it up with additional SIFT test prep videos in the near future, and I'll explain what that SIFT test prep means here in the video. So without further delay, let's get started. Now if you're not in the Army, the place that you're going to have to start right off the bat is talking with a recruiter. And be careful about talking with these guys. They'll generally try to do anything they can to get you in there in the Army, the easiest method possible. So just make sure you do your research prior to talking to the recruiter. But this video is going to cover the gap between talking to that recruiter and getting started in Army flight school. Now there are two different paths to choose from here because there's two types of aviators in the United States Army. There's going to be your commissioned officers, which is going to be your lieutenants, your captains, majors, etc. And then there's going to be your warrant officers. It's going to be Warrant Officer 1 all the way to Chief Warrant Officer 5. Now, while both are aviators, their jobs differ drastically. Commissioned officers, they're going to be leading and managing soldiers. So they're going to be your leaders. Whereas your warrant officers, they receive, let me back up. Your officers are leading. They receive the orders from higher, they direct soldiers, and they generally fly when they can. Your warrant officers, on the other hand, don't manage personnel. Their job is to be the most technical and tactical experts in the aircraft and are in most cases the most proficient pilots. So whereas you have your leaders, for the officers, these are going to be your tactical experts for the warrant officers. So while an officer will go to meetings, they'll be directing the training, the scheduling of not just their subordinate warrant officer pilots, but also, the lower enlisted as far as the refuelers, the maintainers, supply sergeants, all that kind of stuff. They're managing the entire organization. Your pilots are just focusing on that aircraft and learning how to fly better. That is, unless the warrant officers are doing their additional duties, but that's a completely side note there. Overall, 1 out of 5 pilots are commissioned officers, and the other 4/5 are warrant officers. So we'll start with the officer track. So to become an officer, you must go through a commissioning source. So either Officer Candidate School or your Reserve Officer Training Corps, ROTC, or some sort of military academy such as West Point. Now these are going to be what's known as your commissioning source. As you go through these commissioning sources, you're earning your college degree, and at the end of it, you're pinning on second lieutenant. You're an officer in the United States Army. At some point in this process, you're racked and stacked against the peers that you went to school with and put on what's called a Order of Merit list, or also known as an OML, where you compete once again with your peers to select a service branch. So while you might be trying to get to aviation to get to flight school, there is the chance that you could potentially get put into artillery or infantry or whatever branch. So generally, the better you do competing with your peers, the more likelihood you'll be able to select your branch. But if you just barely skate on through the course, it's likely that the Army is just going to tell you, hey, this is whatever branch we have left over. Ultimately, it's needs of the Army as far as getting that branch. But once you have selected aviation, you're going to go ahead and proceed right down to Fort Rucker, Alabama to begin flight training. Now, the alternate route is becoming a warrant officer. Here you complete what's called a WAFT packet, and that's the Warrant Officer Flight Training Packet. This packet has quite a few requirements, and these are requirements for both the officers and the warrant officers. Just for the warrant officers, all of this stuff is going to be right up front. But as far as the requirements for becoming a warrant officer, putting in this WAFT packet, first, you're going to have to meet Army eligibility. Now, as far as Army eligibility, this is, things like your height, weight standards. You must be fit enough to be a soldier in the United States Army. You're going to have to pass a basic physical exam, making sure that all your body parts work. You're not medically disqualified for that basic entry. For the flight packet, you're going to have to also have a high school degree and be between the ages of 18 to 32 years old. Next, you must be able to pass a Army physical training test, or PT test, physical fitness test as they call it. Now this PT test changes Currently, it's the push-up, sit-ups, and the 2-mile run, but they're switching to a more multifaceted event. But whatever the standing PT test in the Army is at the time, you must be able to get a passing score. Next, you must be eligible to get a secret clearance or a secret security clearance. Now, for this, they're going to be looking at things like your previous criminal history, excessive debts, any kind of foreign ties or influences, your mental health, any kind of drug use, so on and so forth. Fourth, you're going to have to pass the Asvab. And the Asvab is just the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. It's the entrance exam for the Army to see what jobs you just initially even qualify for. So it's kind of like your ACT or your SAT that you take in high school that has a battery of different tests to see where you score on that. But what you want to focus on here is making sure that you, one, pass the exam, but two, you want to get a GT or a general technical score of 110, which is the minimum score you need to get into aviation. Once you've passed that, you can sign up to take the SIFT test, which is going to be the selection instrument for flight training. So your ASVAB is what you take to get into the Army to find a job, or what jobs you qualify for. The SIFT is the entrance exam that you have to take to get into aviation. Next, you're going to have to take or pass a Class 1 flight physical. And this is just saying that you are physically fit to fly. So it's really checking things like your vision, your hearing, making sure you don't have things that, maybe you black out or something like that every now and then, or have seizures. Anything that could potentially have negative influences on you in the cockpit is probably going to be something that disqualifies you from that flight physical. Last, you're going to need some letters of recommendation, a minimum of 3. Now, these can be from employers, teachers, people from your community, or say you're already an enlisted soldier and you're putting in a WAF packet, it could be from your chain of command. Now, all of this is going to be compiled into the packet and then sent to a selection board, which convenes depending on what board it is, but generally quarterly, I believe, is when the boards convene, and they're just going to be reviewing their packets. Now, this is why you want your packet to be as competitive as possible. You want to have a high ASVAB score, a great SIF score, PT test is up there, letters of recommendation are just raving about you. And this is just to make your packet shine. Ultimately, the board, if it gets to accept, say, 100 packets this quarter, and maybe there's 150 submitted, you want to be right there in that top 100 so that your packet makes it. Now, once your packet is accepted, you're going to transition to WOCS, which is going to be your Warrant Officer Candidate School, kind of like your Officer Candidate School to become an officer. It's the same thing to make you a Warrant Officer in the United States Army. It's going to be at Fort Rucker, Alabama, and then from there you're going to proceed straight into flight school. Now, officers and Warrant Officers both have to meet the same basic requirements prior to flight training, but for officers, you kind of complete these requirements at different stages throughout the process, whereas for Warrant Officers, everything is up front in the Warrant Officer flight training packet. Generally, your officers are going to complete the majority of these somewhere in this process, but you may not take your SIFT or your flight physical until you've actually selected aviation or been eligible to pick aviation, and you take that towards the end right before flight school. But flight school is starts every 2 weeks, and so these two sources are constantly pumping out officers and Warrant Officers and feeding them through flight school, so every 2 weeks another class picks up. One last stipulation to add to the video is that this is the current process and could be subject to change. Obviously, the Army, changes every few years its requirements for different fields, but currently this is the standing kind of paths that you can take to get to flight school. But that wraps up this video. If you have any questions or feedback, just be sure to leave a comment below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe as well. Once again, I'm Jacob, and this has been Helicopter Lessons in 10 Minutes or Less. Safe flying.